Sign the house over, or you'll die alone in this hospital bed. That was the sentence my son Michael spat at me as I lay hooked up to wires and tubes in St. Joseph's Hospital in Cleveland. His voice wasn't trembling. There was no grief, no hesitation, just the cold certainty of a man who thought he had already won. The fluorescent lights above buzzed, the smell of antiseptic burned my nose, and I felt my body sink deeper into the stiff mattress. My 72nd birthday had come and gone just last week. The cake from the nursing staff still sat in my mini-fridge half-eaten, but instead of candles and laughter here, I was cornered by the very boy I had carried for 9 months, raised with trembling hands and given every ounce of my life to. Michael wasn't alone. His wife Sandra leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her designer handbag slung carelessly over her shoulder. She had that smirk she always wore around me, the kind that said she already pictured herself sipping wine by the pool of my house. "Mom, it's for the best," she said smoothly, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You can't manage that old place anymore. It's too big for one woman. Think of how lonely it must be." Lonely. That word stung worse than the IV needle in my hand. For years I had kept the house alive after my husband passed, mowing the lawn, paying the bills, keeping the garden roses blooming. It wasn't just a house. It was my life's anchor. And now my own son stood there, demanding I hand it over like it was nothing more than a piece of paperwork. Michael pushed the folder across the table by my bed. I could see the legal stamps, the neat lines of a property transfer contract. My house, the one I had bought with my husband 40 years ago for $85,000, and which was now worth over $1.2 million in this market, was right there on those pages. "Sign it, Mom." He repeated, this time quieter but sharper. His jaw clenched the way it used to when he was a boy denied a toy in the grocery store. "Or you'll die here alone. No one will visit you. No one will care." My hand trembled. Not from weakness, though the illness had worn me down, but from rage. I wanted to shout, to curse, to throw that folder back in his face. But my throat tightened. My eyes stung. The boy I raised had turned into a man I didn't recognize. And that's when I felt it. Every stranger who's ever been betrayed knows that moment, the deep, sinking ache in your chest, when you realize the person you trusted most now sees you as disposable. I looked toward the hallway. A nurse, a young man in scrubs with tired eyes, stood frozen just a few feet away holding a tray. He'd heard everything. His gaze darted between me and my son, disbelief etched on his face. But Michael didn't notice. He leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear. "Do you want to die here, Mom, alone forgotten? Or do you want me to take care of things for you?" I swallowed hard, my fingers brushing the pen they'd placed beside the papers. The nurse shifted his weight as if he was about to step in, but Sandra's cold stare kept him glued to the floor. I picked up the pen. My signature, shaky and slow, dragged across the page. My son exhaled with relief, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Sandra straightened, smugness radiating from her. They thought they had won. But as the ink bled into the paper, I whispered so softly, even I barely heard it. "Not what you expected, Michael." And in that moment, I knew something they didn't, something that would change everything. My name is Margaret Williams, 72 years on this earth, and I thought I had seen it all: hard work, grief, love, sacrifice. But nothing could have prepared me for the betrayal of my own flesh and blood. I wasn't born into wealth. My father worked the night shift at the steel mill in Youngstown until his lungs gave out. My mother cleaned houses for rich families, her knees swollen and raw by the time she was 40. I was the eldest of 4 kids, which meant responsibility sat heavy on my shoulders from the very beginning. At 16, while other girls were daydreaming about dances and dresses, I was bagging groceries at Miller's Market to help pay the electric bill. When I turned 20, I married my husband Robert. He was steady, dependable, a man who believed in building things with his hands. Together, we saved every penny, scraping and sacrificing, until in 1983 we bought that little 3-bedroom colonial house on Maple Street for $85,000. It wasn't much by today's standards, but to us it was everything. We planted roses along the fence line, painted the shutters navy blue, and built a swing in the backyard for our children. I still remember the first time Michael's small legs pumped that swing so hard, I thought he might fly into the sky. His laughter carried across the yard like music. Life wasn't easy, but we made it work. Robert worked construction. I took double shifts at the nursing home. Sometimes I came home with my back aching so badly I could barely stand, but when I saw Michael sleeping safe in his bed, I told myself it was worth it. We clipped coupons, patched our clothes, skipped vacations. Every dime went into that house, that mortgage, that dream. Then in 2001, Robert had a heart attack. One minute he was tinkering in the garage, the next he was gone. Just like that, I was a widow at 48. I didn't crumble, though I wanted to. I poured myself into keeping our home alive. I refinished the floors, patched the roof, learned how to fix the leaky pipes myself because calling a plumber was too expensive. Every creak in those wooden floors carried Robert's memory. Every rose that bloomed reminded me of the hands we planted them with. Michael was my only child, my pride, my reason to keep breathing when grief threatened to crush me. I worked extra shifts to put him through college. He came out with a degree in business and an appetite for bigger things, cars, luxury, the kind of life we had never known. I told myself that was fine. He deserved more. I wanted him to have what I never could. When he married Sandra, I bit my tongue, even though I saw the way she looked down on me, on my plain clothes, on the way I cooked from scratch instead of ordering out on my old Ford that coughed and sputtered down the street. "She's not your type, Michael," I once whispered to him. He waved me off. "Mom, you don't understand. This is the life I want." So I smiled through clenched teeth at their wedding, handed Sandra the pearl earrings Robert had once given me, and told myself maybe she would soften. She never did. Still, I never asked for much. A phone call once in a while, a Sunday dinner now and then, someone to check in when the snow piled too high for me to shovel. Instead, months would pass in silence. When Michael did show up, it was always rushed, like visiting his own mother was another errand to cross off a list. And yet, despite the distance, I never imagined it would come to this. To my own son standing in a hospital room demanding I sign away the very roof that sheltered him his whole childhood. I think about the house every day, the navy shutters, the roses out front, the faint smell of Robert's aftershave still lingering in the upstairs bathroom. That house isn't just walls and bricks. It's the last living piece of the life we built. And here I was, lying weak in a hospital bed being told I was a burden, a useless old woman who should hand over the only thing she had left. But I'm not weak. I may be old. I may have arthritis gnawing at my knees, my hands trembling when I hold a coffee cup. But inside me, there's steel. Steel from my father who worked himself to death. Steel from my mother who scrubbed floors until her fingers bled. Steel from Robert, who taught me that you fight for what's yours. And when Michael thinks he's cornered me, when Sandra smirks like she's already sipping wine on my patio, they forget one thing I didn't survive 72 years by being stupid. It was supposed to be a celebration. The calendar on the fridge still had a red circle around that date. Sunday, April 14th. Michael had promised he'd take me out for my birthday dinner. 72 years old wasn't exactly a milestone worth fireworks, but in my heart I still clung to the hope of one evening together. A meal, a cake, a laugh, maybe even a thanks, Mom. Instead, I found myself sitting stiffly in a booth at Miller's Diner on Main Street. It wasn't fancy, checkered tablecloths, the faint smell of bacon grease, neon sign buzzing outside the window. But it was the same place Robert used to bring me after church when we were newlyweds. It meant something to me. Michael arrived late as always. Sandra clung to his arm, her heels clicking too loud on the linoleum. Behind them trailed their daughter, my granddaughter Emily, 16 years old, head bent over her phone, thumbs tapping so quickly she barely looked up. "Sorry we're late," Sandra announced, though she didn't sound sorry at all. She slid into the booth opposite me, immediately scrolling through her own phone as if even being here was a burden. Michael sat beside her, stretching an arm across the booth as if he owned the place. Emily gave me a quick nod, but her eyes dropped back to TikTok before I could even say hello. I forced a smile. "I'm just glad you're here." The waitress, a young blonde with tired eyes, set down menus. "Birthday special tonight," she chirped. "Free slice of chocolate cake," I chuckled. "Well, I think I qualify." But the warmth in my voice fell flat. No one laughed. Michael barely glanced at the menu. Sandra whispered something in his ear and he smirked. The food came. Meatloaf for me, steak for Michael, salad for Sandra. Emily barely touched her fries. The silence was heavy, broken only by the clinking of silverware. Then halfway through the meal, Sandra leaned back and sighed dramatically. "You know, Margaret," she said loud enough for the tables around us to hear, "maybe it's time you thought about moving out of that big house." Her voice was sweet, but the words sliced through me. I felt the air shift as the family at the next booth turned their heads. I set down my fork. "Excuse me." She tilted her head, faux sympathy painted across her face. It's too much for you, isn't it? All those rooms, all that cleaning. Wouldn't it be better if Michael and I took it off your hands? You could move into something smaller, a nice retirement condo maybe. Think how easy life would be." Michael didn't stop her. In fact, he nodded. "She's right, Mom. You shouldn't be rattling around in that old place. We'd put it to good use. Think of it as keeping the house in the family." Heat rose in my chest. Around us, the diner grew quieter. I could feel the stares. The old man, 2 booths down, paused mid-bite of his burger. The woman at the counter shifted uncomfortably on her stool. "This is my home," I said, my voice low, firm. Sandra's smile widened. "For now." The waitress appeared again, balancing a small plate with a slice of chocolate cake, a single candle flickering on top. She set it in front of me. "Happy birthday, ma'am." But before I could even make a wish, Sandra muttered, "Careful you don't spill the coffee on yourself again." Michael chuckled. Emily snickered behind her phone. My cheeks burned. "Why would you say that?" I asked, though my throat tightened around the words. "Because it's true," Sandra said louder now. "You're 72? You can barely carry your own groceries. How long before you burn the place down because you forget the stove is on? We're just being practical." The laughter from my own family stung worse than any insult from a stranger. The cake sat untouched, wax dripping onto the frosting as the candle leaned and sputtered. The waitress glanced at me, her lips pressed tight as though she wanted to say something, but she moved away, shoulders tense. Michael pushed his plate aside. "Just sign the papers, Mom. We'll take care of everything." And there it was, spoken out loud in the middle of a diner on my birthday. The truth wasn't even hidden anymore. They wanted the house. My house. For the first time that night, Emily looked up from her phone. Her eyes darted between me and her parents. Something flickered there, hesitation, maybe even guilt. But she said nothing. I stared at the melted candle. My hands trembled in my lap. Around me, strangers whispered, shook their heads, and returned to their meals. And I realized, with a cold twist in my gut, the humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was public. My own family had stripped me bare in front of the world, and the night was only just beginning. The candle on my cake had burned itself out, a small trail of smoke curling toward the ceiling. It felt like a metaphor for me used up, fading, forgotten. Sandra leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the cheap diner wood. "Honestly, Margaret," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "you're just dead weight at this point. Why are you clinging to a house you can't even manage?" I blinked. Dead weight. Michael didn't flinch. He sipped his soda, eyes fixed on me. "She's right, Mom. You've become a burden. You know it, we know it. The house is wasted on you." The room shifted. I could feel the stares, customers pretending to focus on their burgers, their fries, but their ears tuned to every word. The humiliation crawled under my skin like fire ants. Sandra laughed softly, cruelly. "A 72-year-old who can't even pour her coffee without spilling it. What good are you in a big house? It's pathetic." The words echoed. Pathetic. My hand tightened around my fork until my knuckles went white. "That's enough," I whispered. But she wasn't done. She wanted blood. No, really. Everyone here should know Margaret's house. It's not hers anymore. She can't take care of it. Michael and I will be moving in soon once she stops being so stubborn. It's only fair. The man 2 booths down set down his sandwich, staring openly now. The older woman at the counter shook her head, muttering something under her breath. Even the waitress froze mid-step, her tray hovering in the air. "Don't sit there looking shocked," Sandra pressed on louder, savoring the attention. "You've had your time. You raised your son fine. But now, you're nothing but a leech on his success. He's the one with the business, the income, the future. What do you have? A creaky old house you can't maintain." My chest tightened. Rage and shame twisted together until I thought I might choke. Michael leaned in, his voice low but firm. "Just sign, Mom. Stop fighting this. You don't want to end up alone, do you? You don't want to die in that house, do you?" Gasps rippled through the diner. The cruelty wasn't subtle anymore. It was blatant, exposed. I looked around, desperate for an ally. The waitress caught my eye, and for a split second, her lips parted, as if she wanted to say, "This isn't right." But she closed them again, shoulders shrinking. It was Emily who surprised me. My granddaughter set down her phone with a soft clack, her voice trembling. "Dad, maybe don't say it like that." Sandra shot her a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Stay out of this, Emily." But it was too late. The words were already out there, a flicker of defiance from the only one in that family who still had a conscience. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "That house is mine. It's where I raised you, Michael. Where your father and I, Michael, cut me off his tone, ice cold. Dad's gone. Stop hiding behind him." The diner went silent. Plates clinked. A baby cried in the corner, and I felt something inside me fracture. Sandra smiled sweetly at the crowd around us as if auditioning for sympathy. "She's being dramatic. But really, what's the point of her clinging to something she can't use? Margaret, you need to think about reality. You're not the woman you once were. You're useless." That word landed like a slap across my face. Useless. For 72 years, I had carried weight on my shoulders, working shifts at the nursing home, clipping coupons, patching leaky roofs, raising a child who now sat across from me, eyes hard, heart colder than steel. I had survived widowhood loneliness nights when the bills nearly swallowed me whole. And now in front of strangers, I was reduced to useless. The old man in the red flannel 2 booths down finally spoke. His voice was rough but clear. "Lady, you don't deserve this. Not from your own family." Sandra whipped her head toward him, eyes narrowing. "Mind your own business." But the damage was done. His words lingered in the air, a spark of truth cutting through the poison. I wanted to thank him. I wanted to scream. But instead, I sat frozen, the humiliation burning hotter with every second. And deep inside, beneath the shame, something else stirred. Not weakness, not despair. Anger. A slow, simmering anger that promised this story wasn't over, not by a long shot. The diner had fallen into a strange kind of silence, one where forks still scraped plates and the coffee pot hissed on the burner, but every ear was tuned to the war unfolding at my booth. Sandra leaned back with the confidence of a victor, her voice dripping with condescension. "Margaret, stop making a scene. Just accept it. You don't own that house anymore." "Not really. You're squatting in a place you can't manage." "It's embarrassing." Michael nodded, sliding a manila envelope from his jacket pocket. He slapped it onto the table between us. The sharp crack made the waitress flinch in the corner. "The papers are ready, Mom." The lawyer drew them up. "All it needs is your signature." My hands trembled in my lap. "You brought them here, to my birthday dinner." Michael's jaw tightened. "We're done waiting. You sign tonight." Sandra smirked. "Consider it a gift, Margaret. A chance to do something useful for once." Useful. Another knife twisted deep. I looked around the diner, but no one would meet my gaze anymore. The man in the flannel had gone back to his sandwich. The waitress pretended to wipe down a spotless counter. Only Emily sat rigid, her phone abandoned on the table, her wide eyes darting between us. "Dad," she whispered. "This isn't right," Sandra hissed. Emily quiet. But Michael was relentless. He shoved the envelope closer, the corner of it snagging the tablecloth. "Mom, you can't keep that house. You're sick. You're old. You're alone. Do you want to rot in there with no one to find you when you fall? We're offering you security." "No," I said, my voice small but steady. Sandra's laugh was sharp and ugly. "No. What do you mean, no? You don't get a choice anymore. You can't afford the taxes. You can't afford the upkeep. You can't even afford to fix the roof when it leaks." Michael and I checked. The last property tax bill was over $9,000, wasn't it? $9,000 for a crumbling house you can't even mow the lawn for. Heat flushed my face. She wasn't wrong, the taxes had climbed higher every year. I'd skipped new shoes, new coats, dinners out, all to scrape enough together. But hearing it thrown at me like an accusation in front of strangers cut me to pieces. Michael pressed on. We've already talked to a realtor. The house is worth at least $1.2 million now. That's money being wasted while you sit there clinging to memories. The blood drained from my face. You talked to a realtor? Sandra's eyes glittered with triumph. Of course we did. We're not waiting for you to die to get what should already be ours. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Around me, the diner buzzed with whispers. People couldn't look away now. They stared, wide-eyed forks frozen halfway to their mouths, caught between horror and curiosity. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to remind them all that it was my name on that deed. My sweat in those walls, my life poured into every brick and flower bed. But the weight of it all pressed me down. For the first time in 72 years, I felt truly cornered. Michael slid the envelope until it pressed against my plate, the candle wax from my melted birthday candle smudging across the manila surface. Sign it. Tonight. My throat closed. My hands shook. I couldn't breathe. Emily's voice trembled. Grandma doesn't have to. Enough, Michael barked, making her flinch. Sandra leaned in, her voice low but venomous. You sign Margaret, or you die in that house alone like a forgotten relic. Do you want that? Do you want to be found weeks later by some neighbor calling the cops because of the smell? The image made my stomach twist. The cruelty was limitless. I looked down at the envelope, the papers inside the pen resting beside it. My vision blurred with tears. For a moment I considered it. Just signing, giving in, letting them take it all so I could have peace, so I could stop the humiliation, so I could finally rest. But then I heard Robert's voice in my head, steady, strong, the way he used to sound when life was beating us down. Don't let anyone take what's yours, Maggie. Not ever. I blinked, swallowing the sob rising in my throat. Sandra mistook my silence for surrender. She smiled sweetly victorious. Good. Be smart for once. Michael shoved the pen into my hand. Do it, Mom. The diner had gone so quiet I could hear the hum of the neon sign outside. Every eye was on me. My dignity, my history, my very soul pressed against the edge of that paper. And in that crushing moment, as injustice wrapped its hands around my throat, I made a choice. I would let them think they'd won. For now. Because the game wasn't over. Not yet. That night, long after the birthday dinner ended, I lay awake in my hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles, counting each one as though the rhythm could calm me. But the words echoed louder than any ticking clock. Dead weight, burden, useless. Sandra's voice carried in my head, cruel and clear. Michael's cold eyes haunted me. I could still see the envelope on that diner table, the melted candle wax staining its edge, my trembling hand almost signing away everything I had fought for. I pressed my palm flat against the thin blanket, my skin paper-dry veins showing like blue rivers. To anyone else, I probably looked weak, an old woman with nothing left to give. But they didn't know. They didn't remember. I remembered. I remembered being 19 years old, scrubbing dishes at the Greasy Spoon downtown until midnight, just so my siblings could have shoes for school. I remembered clipping coupons on Sunday mornings with Robert, spreading them across the kitchen table like playing cards, deciding which we could use and which we couldn't afford. I remembered Robert's calloused hands covering mine when I cried the day the bank nearly foreclosed on our home in 1987. We had fallen behind on payments when Emily was born, and Michael needed braces. We'll find a way, Maggie, he told me. And we did. We always did. Every sacrifice had carved itself into my bones. Every dollar saved, every hour worked, every night I fell asleep at the nursing home on a cot between shifts, it was all etched into me. That house wasn't a prize. It was the ledger of my life. And yet my son saw none of it. He saw only the present, a frail old woman, a house worth $1.2 million, a property tax bill that loomed like a monster. But I wasn't just some frail old woman. I had survived too much to be written off so easily. I remembered the night Robert died, November 3rd, 2001. He'd been working on the old Chevy in the garage when his heart gave out. I found him slumped against the tool bench, a wrench still in his hand. I screamed until my throat bled, but it was too late. He was 51. I was 48. And just like that, my life split into two halves, before and after. I could have let grief bury me, but I didn't. I went back to work within 2 weeks, dragging myself through double shifts at the nursing home, my back screaming, my knees swollen. Every paycheck went straight into keeping that house alive. I patched leaks myself with tar from the hardware store. I shoveled snow in the dead of winter until my fingers froze. I even crawled into the crawl space once to fix a broken pipe rats, scattering around me because I refused to let the house fall apart. Why? Because I had promised Robert. Because it was the one thing left tying me to him. And Michael knew this. He had grown up watching me work myself raw. He had seen me bleed for that house. He had walked across those floors. I scrubbed on my knees, slept under the roof. I kept patched, eaten meals from groceries. I pinched pennies to afford. And now he wanted to strip it from me. I pressed my eyes shut, fighting back tears. For a moment, despair threatened to swallow me. Maybe Sandra was right. Maybe I was just a tired old woman clinging to a past that no one else cared about. But then another memory surfaced. Michael, 6 years old, coming home from school with tears streaming down his face because a teacher had called him slow. I held him in my lap, rocking him, whispering, "You are not slow. You are smart and kind, and you will do great things. Don't you let anyone tell you otherwise." I fought for him then. I gave him belief when no one else did. And now, decades later, he sat in a diner telling me I was useless. The bitterness burned hotter than any sickness. But under the bitterness, something stronger began to take root. Resolve. I wasn't done. Not yet. Because buried beneath the floorboards of that house, tucked away in safety deposit boxes and sealed envelopes, there were things Michael didn't know. Things Robert and I had planned long before death tore us apart. And as I lay there in that hospital bed, Sandra's voice echoing like poison, I thought of one word: leverage. They thought they had me cornered, but they had no idea what was coming. The next morning, sunlight crept through the hospital blinds, pale and unforgiving. I hadn't slept much. My mind kept circling back to that envelope on the diner table, Michael's cold eyes, Sandra's cruel smirk. I shifted in bed, and something sharp pressed against my hip. Frowning, I reached into the pocket of the cardigan I'd worn to dinner. My fingers brushed against an edge paper, folded and worn. I pulled it out slowly. It was an envelope yellowed with age, the kind Robert used to keep tucked away in his desk. My heart skipped. How had it gotten there, I remembered. Weeks earlier, before the hospital, I had gone to the attic to box up old winter coats. In one pocket, buried deep in Robert's old jacket, I had found this very envelope. I'd slipped it into my sweater absent-mindedly, too tired to open it at the time. And then, with all the chaos, I had forgotten. Until now. With trembling fingers, I peeled it open. Inside was a single piece of paper. Robert's handwriting leapt off the page, strong and steady, despite all these years. "Maggie, if you're reading this, it means life has gotten harder than we planned. But don't worry, I thought ahead. The house is safe. Look in the deposit box. First Federal Bank, Cleveland branch. Key is taped under the top drawer of my workbench. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, the hospital walls seemed to close in, the beeping machines fading into silence. I could almost hear Robert's voice, calm and certain, whispering from beyond the grave. The house is safe. I closed my eyes, clutching the letter to my chest. Robert always had a way of preparing for the worst. He never trusted lawyers fully, always muttered about loopholes and paper trails. If he had left something in that deposit box, it meant there was more to the story than Michael and Sandra could ever guess. I thought back to the workbench in the garage. It was still there, gathering dust, filled with Robert's old tools. How many times had I walked past it without looking closer? How many times had I sat in that garage mourning him, unaware that a key, my lifeline, was taped just inches away? I opened my eyes. My pulse quickened. For the first time in days, a spark of hope flickered inside me. but hope had to be handled carefully. I couldn't tell Michael. Couldn't let Sandra see the shift in my eyes. If they suspected I had something, they'd tear through that house like vultures rip apart every drawer, every floorboard. No, this secret had to stay mine. I slid the envelope back into my cardigan pocket, my fingers trembling less, now steadier with purpose. Just then the nurse, the same young man who had overheard Michael's cruel words, stepped into the room with a tray of pills. His gaze flicked to my face, lingered on the faint smile I couldn't quite hide. "You seem different this morning," he said softly, almost cautiously. I met his eyes. "Some things are worth fighting for." He hesitated, then nodded, and in that small gesture I felt something shift. Maybe I wasn't as alone as Michael and Sandra wanted me to believe. As the nurse left, I pressed the envelope flat against my chest one last time. They thought they had stripped me bare, humiliated me in front of strangers, cornered me with papers and threats. But Robert's voice still echoed in my ears, "The house is safe." And for the first time since my birthday, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. When Michael and Sandra came back to the hospital the following evening, I was ready. I kept my face pale, my voice soft, my movements weak. I let my hand tremble when I lifted the styrofoam cup of water, let the cough rattle in my chest longer than it needed to. Let them believe what they wanted, that I was shrinking, fading easy prey. Sandra set her handbag on the chair and crossed her legs, smug as a cat who'd cornered a mouse. Michael leaned against the wall, his arms folded, the manila envelope still tucked under his arm. They thought time was on their side. "How are we feeling today?" Sandra asked, her tone dripping with mock concern. "Still thinking about our little talk?" I smiled faintly, masking the fire inside me. I suppose you're right. The house is too much for me." Michael's face lit with triumph. He stepped closer. "So you'll sign?" I lowered my gaze, letting silence stretch. "Soon." They exchanged a glance, satisfied. They didn't notice the envelope hidden beneath my blanket, the one with Robert's note, the clue they would never see. After they left, I asked the nurse, the same young man who'd overheard them in the diner, to help me with something. His name was David. Quiet, kind eyes, the kind that carried weight beyond his years. "David," I whispered when he came in with the evening meds, "do you have a phone that can take pictures?" He blinked. Yes, ma'am." I pointed to the envelope Michael had left on the nightstand, thick with legal papers. "Would you mind taking a picture of what's inside for me, just in case it goes missing?" He hesitated, glancing at the door. "If your family, they don't need to know," I said quickly. "Please." Something in my tone must have convinced him because he nodded. A few minutes later, he handed the papers back, images saved on his phone. "I'll keep them safe," he promised. I exhaled slowly. For the first time, I had a record. Proofs. Later that night, when the hallways quieted and the machines hummed softly, I pulled out Robert's note again. My fingers traced his handwriting. "The house is safe." The words gave me strength. In my mind, I began stitching together a plan. Step 1, get out of this hospital. I couldn't fight from a bed. Step 2, retrieve the key from Robert's workbench in the garage. Step 3, open that deposit box and see what he had left for me. I didn't know what waited inside, but I knew Robert. He was clever, cautious. Whatever it was, it would be the weapon I needed. The next day, when Michael returned with Sandra in tow, I kept my head low, my tone meek. "I'll need a little more time," I murmured. "I'm not feeling well enough to sign anything." Sandra rolled her eyes. "More time, Margaret, you've had years. Don't drag this out." But Michael put a hand on her arm. "Patience," he said. "She's almost there." I smiled weakly, hiding the steel beneath. Let them think I was bending. Let them gloat. When they finally left, David lingered by my bedside. He spoke quietly, his voice urgent. "Ma'am, whatever you're planning, be careful. They don't sound like they'll take no for an answer." I met his eyes steady. "That's why I won't be saying no. Not yet. Because in this war, silence was my shield, and when the moment came, I would strike with everything Robert had left me." It happened 3 days later. The hospital called a family meeting. That's what they called it, but I knew better. Michael had arranged it. Sandra was too polished, too rehearsed when she showed up in her blazer and heels, a leather folder tucked under her arm, like she was walking into a boardroom instead of her mother-in-law's hospital room. Emily trailed behind headphones slung around her neck, her eyes downcast. She hadn't said much since the diner. I could feel her guilt in the way she avoided my gaze. The room was crowded. Michael, Sandra, the hospital social worker, even a young lawyer in a Navy suit Michael had brought along. They all stood around my bed, their shadows stretching long under the harsh fluorescent lights. Mrs. Williams. The lawyer began, his voice smooth. Too smooth, your son and daughter-in-law have asked me to help facilitate the transfer of your home. Given your current health, it's best to ensure everything is in order. I looked at him steadily, saying nothing. Sandra jumped in before I could answer. It's for her own good. That house is too much for her. We'll make sure it stays in the family. In your hands, you mean, I murmured. Michael's jaw clenched. Mom, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just sign. We'll take care of you. You won't have to worry about anything again. The lawyer pulled out the paperwork, sliding it onto the rolling table beside my bed. His fountain pen gleamed under the light. All we need is your signature, ma'am. I glanced at the papers but didn't reach for the pen. My heart pounded in my chest, but my face remained calm. I could feel Robert's note folded against my side, hidden in my pocket like armor. Sandra leaned closer, her perfume suffocating her voice low enough that only I could hear. If you don't sign today, Margaret, you'll regret it. We'll make sure you're alone. Forgotten. I turned my head, my voice just as quiet. I already am. Her smile faltered for just a second, but then Michael cleared his throat, commanding the room. Mom, this isn't a choice anymore. Look around you. You're sick. You're weak. The house is already too much for you. Do you really want to die clutching a deed no one cares about? His words cut deep, but I let them. I let the silence stretch, the humiliation sink deeper, because I knew something they didn't. They weren't the only ones with cards to play. Emily finally spoke. Dad, maybe Grandma should decide on her own. Maybe this isn't Sandra's glare snapped her mouth shut. Stay out of it. The lawyer slid the pen toward me. Whenever you're ready, ma'am. The air was so thick I could barely breathe. My hands shook as I picked up the pen, my fingers curling around it slowly. Gasps rippled through the room. Their victory was almost complete. Michael exhaled relief, flooding his face. Sandra's lips curved into a sharp smile. Even the lawyer leaned forward, ready to collect his prize. But instead of signing, I set the pen down gently. Not today, I said softly. Michael's face darkened. Mom, I need time. I continued, steady now, stronger. If this house is leaving my hands, it will be on my terms, not yours. The lawyer frowned, glancing at Michael. Sandra's fingers drummed impatiently on her folder. Michael leaned in close, his voice a whisper of fury. You're making a mistake. I met his eyes for the first time that day. So are you. The silence that followed was suffocating. For a moment I thought Michael might explode, but then Sandra touched his arm, pulling him back. Fine, she snapped. We'll give her a few more days. But this is happening, Margaret, whether you like it or not. They stormed out, the lawyer trailing behind his briefcase, snapping shut like a coffin lid. Emily lingered in the doorway. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but then she lowered her eyes and followed her parents. When the door closed, I let out the breath I'd been holding. David, the nurse, slipped into the room moments later, his brow furrowed. Are you okay? I managed a faint smile. I will be. Because though Michael and Sandra thought my silence meant defeat, in truth it was strategy. Every insult, every humiliation, every threat, they were only adding weight to the rope they were tying around their own necks. And when the time came, I would be the one to pull it. 2 days later, they brought me back home. The doctors said I was stable enough to recover outside the hospital, though Michael spun it differently. She can't stay there alone anymore, he told the staff. We'll be moving her somewhere safer soon. Safer, of course, meant stripping me from the very walls that had held my life together for 40 years. Sandra drove me up the familiar street, her Mercedes gleaming in the afternoon sun. As the car rolled to a stop in front of my house, my chest tightened. The navy shutters, the roses blooming along the fence, the swing swaying gently in the breeze. Home. My home. Sandra's voice cut through my thoughts. "Don't get too sentimental, Margaret. You won't be here much longer." I didn't answer. My eyes drifted toward the garage. Robert's garage. That night after they left me alone, I crept out of bed, my body aching but fueled by something stronger than pain resolve. I shuffled into the garage, the smell of oil and sawdust wrapping around me like Robert's old jacket. My hands shook as I reached for the workbench. The note had said, "Key is taped under the top drawer." I slid the drawer open, my heart pounding, and reached underneath. My fingers brushed something metallic. The tape tugged against my skin as I pulled it free. A small brass key glinted in the dim light. Tears blurred my vision. Robert. He had thought of everything. The next morning I called a taxi and told the driver to take me downtown. My legs felt like lead, but determination carried me into First Federal Bank. The clerk raised an eyebrow when I slid the key across the counter, but within minutes I was led into a quiet room where a deposit box was placed before me. Inside were two things: a thick stack of documents neatly bound and a small cassette tape labeled in Robert's handwriting, "For Margaret, when the time comes." My breath hitched. I opened the folder first. It was a trust deed dated years ago, notarized, airtight. The house wasn't just in my name. Robert had placed it in a living trust, naming me the sole trustee with specific instructions the property could not be transferred or sold without my explicit consent, regardless of any family pressure. Not even Michael could override it. My knees nearly gave out. He had protected me even from beyond the grave. Then I picked up the cassette tape. I hadn't seen one in years, but the bank manager, curious, offered to play it on an old recorder they kept for such requests. Robert's voice filled the room, steady, warm, heartbreakingly familiar. "Maggie, if you're listening, it means I'm gone and maybe things are harder than we planned. But I need you to remember this: you are stronger than anyone knows. Don't let Michael or anyone push you out of this house. I set things up so the deed can't be taken from you, and if they try, you use this tape. Because the truth matters. I love you." I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth, tears streaming. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. I had everything I needed. 2 days later, Michael and Sandra stormed back into the house, this time with the lawyer in tow. Emily followed quietly, her eyes heavy with something that looked like shame. "Enough is enough," Sandra snapped, slamming her folder onto the coffee table. "We're done playing games, Margaret. You sign today or we'll have you declared incompetent. Do you understand? We'll go to court and you'll lose everything." Michael folded his arms, his face hard. "Mom, this is the last chance. Sign it." I looked at each of them in turn, my heart pounding but my voice calm. "You want me to sign away this house?" "Yes," Sandra hissed. "You're certain?" Michael leaned forward. "Absolutely." Slowly, I reached into the drawer of the coffee table and placed Robert's trust deed on top of their papers. The lawyer froze. His eyes scanned the pages, widening with every line. This changes everything," he muttered. "The property is in a living trust. You can't force her to transfer it. In fact, even if she wanted to, the deed is locked under her control." Michael's face drained of color. Sandra lurched forward, snatching the papers from his hands, flipping through them in disbelief. "This can't be real." "It's very real," the lawyer said quietly, almost apologetically. "Legally binding, ironclad." And then before they could recover, I reached into my pocket and placed the cassette tape on the table. "This," I said. My voice sharp now, "is Robert. His words, his instructions. If you try to fight me on this, I'll play it in court. And every judge, every neighbor, every person will hear exactly what your father thought of all this." The silence that followed was electric. Sandra's lips parted, fury and panic colliding in her eyes. Michael stared at the tape as though it were a weapon aimed straight at his chest. Emily gasped softly, covering her mouth with trembling hands. You planned this," Michael whispered, his voice breaking. "No," I said, rising to my feet, stronger than I had felt in years. "Robert did. He trusted me to carry it through." The room shook with the weight of truth, and in that moment, for the first time, it wasn't me who looked small. It was them. The silence in the living room hung heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Sandra's face had gone pale beneath her makeup, her perfectly lined lips trembling with rage. Michael just stood there, the blood draining from his cheeks, his hands curling into fists like a child denied his toy. "You can't do this!" Sandra finally hissed, her voice rising. "We had everything arranged. The realtor was ready. The money that was never yours," I interrupted, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "Mrs. Williams is correct. The trust is binding. The house is legally protected. Any attempt to sell, transfer, or coerce her signature would not hold up in court." He paused, his gaze flicking toward Sandra. "And frankly, given what I've witnessed here, it could even be considered elder abuse." Sandra's jaw dropped. "Elder abuse?" Michael's eyes widened, panic finally breaking through his arrogance. No, we were just trying to help. My laugh was hollow bitter. By threatening me in a diner, by telling me I was useless, by humiliating me in front of strangers on my own birthday, Michael opened his mouth, but no words came. For once, he was speechless. Sandra turned on him, her voice shrill. "You told me this would be simple. You said she'd fold. You said we'd have the deed by now." Michael snapped back, his voice cracking. "How was I supposed to know? Dad set up a trust. He never told me." His voice faltered, and for the first time I saw it. Not anger, not greed, but fear. Emily stepped forward, her small voice shaking. "I heard everything. At the diner. Here. You tried to take Grandma's house. You tried to scare her." Her eyes filled with tears as she turned to me. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I didn't say anything sooner." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You've said enough now." The lawyer gathered his papers, his tone clipped. "If I may advise Michael, Sandra, you should walk away from this. Continuing will only bring legal trouble and reputational damage." Sandra whipped around, glaring daggers at him. "Whose side are you on?" "The law's," he replied coldly. The weight of his words hit the room like a gavel. Michael sagged into the couch, his head in his hands. Sandra stood stiff, trembling with fury, her eyes darting around as though searching for a way out. But there was none. The walls they'd built around me had collapsed on them instead. I rose slowly from my chair. My knees ached, my back screamed, but I stood tall, taller than I had in years. "Do you know what's funny?" I said, my voice low but steady. "You thought you were taking care of me. But it turns out Robert was taking care of me all along. He saw through this before I ever could. And now you're the ones left with nothing." Sandra's face twisted. "This isn't over." "Oh, it is," I said firmly, "because I'm not afraid anymore. And the next time you try something, I'll have that tape played in court for everyone to hear. Imagine what people will think when they hear your father's voice, Michael. When they hear him say, 'He wanted this house safe from you.'" Michael flinched, as though Robert's voice still carried the power to discipline him from beyond the grave. Emily looked at her parents, disgust etched across her young face. "I can't believe you. Both of you. She's your mother, your family, and you treated her like trash." Sandra snapped at her, but Emily didn't back down. For the first time, she lifted her chin, defiant. "If you try to hurt Grandma again, I'll go to the police myself." That silenced even Sandra. They gathered their things in furious silence. Sandra's heels clicked hard against the floor, Michael stumbling after her, shoulders slumped in defeat. The lawyer didn't follow. They left him behind, too ashamed to face his gaze. The front door slammed, rattling the pictures on the wall. For a long moment, the house was quiet. My roses bloomed in the window, the swing swayed outside, and Robert's voice seemed to echo in my ears. "The house is safe." Emily sat beside me, her small hand still in mine. Tears streaked her cheeks, but her eyes glimmered with something else, pride. "You didn't let them win," she whispered. "No," I said softly, "and I never will." The house was quiet again. Too quiet, almost, but this time the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. I sat in Robert's old armchair by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands. The roses outside glowed in the late afternoon sun, their petals bright against the navy shutters. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Michael and Sandra were gone. Their threats, their arrogance, their smirks, all gone, carried out the front door with their slammed heels and slammed briefcases. What remained was mine. My house, my dignity, my strength. Emily padded into the room, her sneakers squeaking softly on the wood floors. She sat across from me, her teenage bravado stripped away, leaving only the wide-eyed girl who had once swung in the backyard while her grandfather pushed her higher and higher. "Grandma," she asked quietly, "are you okay?" I smiled, the kind of smile that came from surviving the storm. "Better than okay. I'm free." Her brow furrowed. "I don't understand. Why would Mom and Dad do that?" "You gave Dad everything. You worked so hard." Why wasn't it enough? I reached across the table, my hand covering hers. Some people see love as weakness. They mistake kindness for something they can exploit. They forget that behind these wrinkles, behind these tired hands, there is still strength. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I'll never forget, Grandma. I promise." I nodded, squeezing her hand. "That's all I need." The cassette tape sat on the table between us. I had replayed Robert's words over and over that morning, his voice filling the room like sunlight. "Don't let anyone push you out. The house is safe. Safe. Not just the house, but me too. Because I finally understood I wasn't just holding on to walls and bricks. I was holding on to respect. To the years I'd worked, to the sacrifices I'd made, to the love Robert and I had poured into this life. Michael had called me useless. Sandra had called me dead weight. But in the end, it was their greed that left them with nothing. And me, I had everything I needed. The next Sunday, I returned to Miller's Diner. Not to relive the humiliation, but to reclaim the space. The same waitress spotted me as I walked in, her face lighting with recognition. "You're back," she said softly. I nodded. "This time I'll actually eat the cake." She smiled and set a slice of chocolate cake in front of me, a single candle flickering once more. But this time the flame didn't feel like mockery. It felt like victory. The man in the red flannel 2 booths down raised his coffee mug to me, a silent salute. I raised mine back, and as I blew out the candle, I whispered my wish, not for wealth, not for health, not even for forgiveness. Respect. Because that's all I had ever wanted. Not pity, not charity, not to be hidden away in some retirement condo like a forgotten relic. Just respect. When I returned home, Emily was waiting on the porch. She helped me up the steps, her arms steady under mine. For a moment, I saw Robert there too, his ghost smiling in approval. Inside the house seemed to breathe with me. The walls held their secrets, the floors carried their memories, and the roses outside bloomed brighter than ever. I lowered myself back into my chair, the weight of the past weeks lifting. For 72 years, I had lived for others, for siblings, for a husband, for a son. And now, finally, I was living for myself. Grandma Emily said, her voice soft but certain, "I'll help you take care of this place. I'll be here." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were warm, not bitter. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's all I need." Outside, the swing creaked in the breeze. For the first time in a long time, the sound didn't ache. It sang. I leaned back, closing my eyes, Robert's voice still echoing in my heart. The house is safe. And for once, I believed it.